I'll post it on Facebook, and we'll better log out of Zoom, or it won't.
Yeah.
And I'll see you in a minute on YouTube.
Okay. Well, I'm here at least. Hello. Welcome. Oh, at least 2 people. So let's see if you can share photos here. No. It's still quiet. You can hear me, but I can't hear you. But it's always a bit strange at the beginning. So I suppose the URL is this one at the top of the. Can you see me? You can't see me. Oh, at least that works. Hi, Alberto. Some people begin to figure out. There we go. I will start a 1:15, I think. Then we can do an hour or something. Questions and answers if there are enough. and then we'll move to Zoom afterwards, because it's much easier when I want to show photos and stuff like that. I'm not very good at YouTubing yet. If anybody has a question, you can type it already if you want to. You can think about it in the meantime. The answer, that is. Oh, that's. They find it kind of funny because the YouTubers they are watching have like 1 million followers and things like that. So I have, if I'm live streaming, there are maybe 10 people if I'm lucky. On the other hand, I think it's cool because it proves I'm not just a dead piece of furniture, but still live in the modern world. Anna did some, most of the time on TikTok. She makes some videos herself, and she had one where she had something like 35,000 likes. So she's doing something better than I am. But we are in the business of philosophy, and that's always a bit slower in going. Yeah, I thought that we get to the 300 mark. Still 999,700 to go, but you never know. Yeah, I'll try and figure it out with her. Sometimes I think I know how it works. I can set up the live stream, but to get in is every time it's a problem. But I want to do it once a month, or this time it's been more than 2 months that something like that. So I have to take notes. Let's see if somebody's asking where we are. Let's see. Yeah. Pete seems to have found it. We're still with the same small group of people, so if anybody has a question, please feel free to type the question. So just get started a bit. Well, I can do that. It's a suggestion from Louise and talk about the films. Well, we did the first one is up on the YouTube channel, so I think you all will have seen it by now. It's our little walk down the country path. I think we did a decent job on it. It's production values are good. I'm still getting used to the idea of being some kind of presenter. And but I will be getting better at it, I think. Louise and I will be back in Meeskirch in May and make some new movies, not only in Meeskirch, but also in Boiron and then Constance, if we can organize it all. I've been in touch with the gymnasium where Heidegger went to. It's not the same building, unfortunately, but we can film the original building and we can film at the new building, which goes back to 1910, so it's not really that new. And they still have some Heideggeriana in their archive, some photos, and we'll see what else they have, and we can film that. And when I'm there, I will be doing a talk on Heidegger and Constance and a little bit on his path of thinking with the pupils of the gymnasium, which will be interesting, I think. Louise is hard at work on the second movie, which is I titled A Walk Through Meeskirch. So and there we made some, we shot material at the castle in Meeskirch, at the church, at the house where Heidegger lived. And, I think also the Raadhuis, the town hall, the emergency church where Heidegger was baptized. We show you the place where Heidegger's birth house used to stand, but it's been demolished over 100 years ago. So I think it will be an interesting little movie as well. So far, we get pretty positive replies, so that encourages us to go on. And maybe when we get the next batch of material filmed, then we can see if we can edit into one longer movie and use that as a stepping stone to do, let's say, a biographical documentary on Heidegger, and then see that we get some funding so we can go to the different places that Heidegger went, not only in Germany, but also to Le Tour in France, for example, Cercy-la-Salle, where Heidegger spent almost 2 weeks, where he presented his famous talk, Was ist das, die Philosophie? What is philosophy? And had discussions with Agamben, Beauvais, Gabriel Marcel. There's a lot of interesting people who attended the seminars as well. So it still exists. It's still organizing conferences and things like that, workshops. So you may even go to Amsterdam. Trace Heidegger's steps in Amsterdam and The Hague. We'll see what we can do and where it will lead to. That's about it, about the movies. So I think we will be able to put up the second one at least this month. So maybe in 2 weeks. And we'll let you know when it's up and you can watch it. So the strange thing remains that I'm talking, but I can't. You can't talk to me. You can only type. Well, Alberto is asking, can you say something about the end of the correspondence between Heidegger and Laszlo? Perhaps, as far as I know, after the marriage with Elfriede, was Laszlo in love with his friend? Yeah, that's it's a good question, and you could ask the same about Carl Lewitt, I think. Well, the correspondence didn't break up, or continued at least. Heidegger and Laszlo stayed friends their whole life. At the end of the Second World War in 1945, when Laszlovsky was born and raised in Breslau, which was then German. Fled with his wife to the west of Germany in fear of the Russians. And he lived at Heidegger's house in Freiburg for almost 2 years with his wife. So, and he got a position in Freiburg at the Caritas Society, which is the Catholic institution that provides care for sick people at home and things like that. That's why the correspondence ended up to a large extent at the archive of the Caritas Verband in Freiburg. I think Laszlovsky and Heidegger didn't see each other for long periods of time because Laszlovsky basically lived in Breslau, which is now in Poland. So it's a long way from there to Mesquite or Freiburg. And as far as he may have been in love with Heidegger, I think it's possible. Because in those days for homosexuals, it was basically normal to get married and even raise families. Because it was frowned upon by society. In a lot of places you get sent to prison, like Britain. So for homosexuals it was very difficult. I think you find the traces of it, I think, in Löwit's relation to Heidegger as well. Some kind of homoerotic tension, to say the least. And I think he lived together with his Marseille student who was we met in Munich, and who also was in relation with Heidegger. I don't think that Heidegger himself was very much into homosexuality. Well, the next question is about the conference on Black Notebooks. I think the next conference on Zoom, like the one we just did, I probably will organize it in September at the start of the new academic year. And I think it might be very interesting to focus on the black notebooks, although I prefer to call them just the notebooks. The black is only referring to the cover. So, but then especially also the ones that have been published in the last few years, after the first 5 volumes, 3 volumes of Überlegungen, or considerations in the 2 volumes of Anmerkungen, which is probably annotations, if I do at the top of my head. But then the other notebooks have hardly been discussed. So I think it will be interesting to see more clearly what role they play within the oeuvre of Heidegger. So how do they relate to the conferences and the lecture courses and the published writings, and also the unpublished manuscripts that Heidegger kept to himself during his life. So you have to, of course, if somebody wants to talk about the first 5 volumes, there's no problem. But I would like to shift the focus to the newer material and open up a kind of discussion about them, and maybe also try to find the right way of accessing them and judging them. And you can, of course, go in a lot of different directions. With the Black Notebooks, you can focus on what he has to say about Hölderlin, for example. You can focus on political questions. You can focus on his relation to Catholicism and Christianity and the church, his ideas of thinking, etc. The way a being is described, or things like that. So if anybody already has an idea or would like to present something, just drop me a line and we'll start putting the program together slowly. Well, I haven't read them all. I must admit I didn't have the time yet, so I stand guilty as accused. But I'm basically interested in all the later ones, Nocturne, and the four Hefte, vier Hefte, the Heidegger thinking about verhältnis, which plays an enormously important role, I think, in these later volumes. And there's, of course, still a large manuscript, a large bunch of papers by Heidegger, zu Vermächtnis der Seinsfrage. So, and that will not be in the Gesamtausgabe. That's about, let's see, 300 pages or something. And it's basically Heidegger's also thinking about the Gesamtausgabe and how to find a way of editing all that material in a way that's would be most appropriate for his path of or way of thinking. And that would be something, if we ever can get that, also, let's say, use it at both as a way of accessing the later notebooks and using the later notebooks as a way of accessing this Vermächtnis der Seinsfrage. But since Heidegger's way of thinking doesn't stop, so it's particularly interesting also to go to the latest stuff and see how far he got. He was still before he got his stroke. He was working on translating the Tao with an expert in Chinese who lived in Ulm. And that's where he was going when he had his stroke that basically ended his capability of real creative work. He still wrote a couple of things after 1971, but it's not much. And of course, he spent quite a bit of time from 73 on discussing plans for the Gesamtausgabe, both with Van Herman and, as is mostly pushed to the side, Walter Biemel. Because Walter Biemel had the experience of editing the philosophical text, because he was one of the first editors of the Husserliana in Belgium. The stroke, he couldn't talk at the beginning after the stroke, so I have to read the question first. Did the stroke affect his cognition or just his body? So he was, I think it did both. He was very much weaker, so, which is often a problem when people get to that age or close and around 90. It's often a case of losing your full capacities. And Heidegger couldn't work much anymore, basically, maybe an hour a day or something. So compared to how he used to work when he was younger, it's very little. And he was paralyzed. That's the funny part. And he recovered enough to be able to write and speak again. But his handwriting is different after the stroke. You can see it if you compare a notice or a letter from 1968, 1969 with something that he wrote in 72 or 73. Is there still somebody waiting? No. I'll stay with you. let's see. On the Heidegger-Bultmann friendship, which the importance of studies to John's Gospel for Heidegger's philosophy. I'll do that one first, and then I'll get to the the next one. I would say the influence of the John's Gospel of Heidegger is not so great. He was more influenced by St. Paul in his letters, in his understanding of early Christian religion. And that is what started his intellectual friendship with Bultmann, because Bultmann was also working on early Christianity. And Bultmann, of course, saw in Heidegger's Being and Time a possibility for renewal of theology. And you could probably say that for Heidegger once said that theologians should find the way to let the word of God speak again in their own time. And they shouldn't be focusing on imitating philosophy or trying to develop metaphysical, philosophical theories, but focus on the message. If that's an answer that you can live with. Did he get many letters from fans in the later years? Yes, of course, he got a lot of letters. Not just anybody would write to Heidegger, but there were a lot of students who had written their dissertation that would send a copy of their dissertation to Heidegger, mostly accompanied by a letter stating that they were much influenced by thinking and think that he's a great philosopher, blah, blah, blah. And they hardly dared to ask, but maybe if he could write 2 or 3 lines about their dissertation, that would be wonderful. So, especially in the later years, von Herman became his secretary, if I'm not mistaken, in 1971. So most of that sort of correspondence would be dealt with by von Herman. That's why you get all the typewritten letters from Heidegger are always either typed by von Herman in these last few years or by Elfriede in the early years. If Heidegger sent a letter himself, then he would write by hand. He never used the typewriter. Sometimes he would just jot down a concept for a letter that then would be worked out more precisely by von Herman or Elfriede. Well, so I'm doing some new webinars in the coming weeks. There's one introduction to Heidegger's life and thinking, which takes place over a weekend in 6 sessions. And we'll just follow Heidegger basically on his way of life and his way of thinking. And pay attention to a selection of texts that I picked myself, because I think they give a nice overview of Heidegger thinking, and we'll also discuss his life and also the political background in 33. So it's an introductory course. If you're interested, you can always join. Next one, Heidegger had a radio in the Hütte. Did he embrace many other forms of technology? Well, as you may know, he got the radio in the Hütte because of the Cuba crisis. The voyage was around 1961, and the standoff between Russia, the Soviet Union at the time, and the USA, and the possibility of putting Russian missiles on the soil of Cuba, which would put them basically in the backyard of the US. And in the end, a third world war was avoided. So, but Hardy was very much interested in following how that would go. I would say he would use technology where it would suit him. It's a bit like he says in Gelassenheit. It's saying yes and no to the technology. He didn't mind riding, being driven in a car. He didn't drive himself. He never got a driver's license. Elfriede did. He didn't mind using the train, for example. But he was not somebody who was into the latest television set. I don't think he ever owned a television set. He would watch television during the World Cup in Germany at houses, either with Fritz in his house or with friends in Freiburg. That's something he was interested in. He had great admiration for Beckenbauer, a famous German soccer player, a football player. So I'll go back to the other webinar. There's one on Heidegger and Greek philosophy, which goal is basically to give the participants some understanding of the Greek terminology and Heidegger's way of interpreting it and translating it, which is often very different from traditional translations. So we'll be looking at fragments from the pre-Socratic thinkers, or the early Greek thinkers like Parmenides, Heraclitus, and Anaximander. And we'll also do a couple of sessions on Plato and Aristotle and see how sometimes the meaning of these concepts or words change. Well, Louise has to go and get some Greek food, so hope you have a nice meal. See you later, or Monday probably. I want to check if somebody's looking for the link. Anybody else has a question? This next one. Do you think the controversial situation between Heidegger and Husserl in the 1930s was a political or personal issue? I think, first of all, it was a philosophical issue. Basically, Husserl began to see around 1929 that Heidegger had gone off in a completely different direction than he himself was following, which led, of course, to a distance. When Heidegger became rector in 1933, it was, I think, it was a shock for Husserl. Husserl being, according to the German laws at the time, Jewish, lost his position. He couldn't attend the Senate meeting where Heidegger was elected. You could say that Heidegger took his distance from Husserl. He didn't attend his funeral, although he says himself that he was ill at the time and therefore couldn't come. On the other hand, the only member of the department of philosophy that was present at his funeral was Eugen Fink, his last assistant, who also was still had a good relationship to Heidegger. As you can see from the dedication in volume 2930 on the fundamental concepts of metaphysics, which is dedicated to Eugen Fink. And they did, of course, in 1966 this joint seminar on Heraclitus. So, and I think it's the personal differences. There's a lot of differences that start playing a role already in the early 1920s, which you can find in his correspondence with Löwit and the way they talk about Husserl. So it's always difficult to judge so many years later, but I think it's the main element is philosophical, the political and personal are second, and they played a role as well. So I would say Heidegger's relation, the way he behaved towards Husserl from 1933 on was not very nice, to say the least. But some of the stories that were told were false. He never forbid Husserl to use the library, for example, in the philosophy department. And of course, the volumes of Husserl's work were still there after the Second World War, so they were not burned or something, removed from the library. Next question. Reading Ott, I didn't understand why, in the face of three possibilities, study sciences, a philosophical career, a theological career, the first one did not pose financial problems and the second did pose. Well, the difference is that I think Heidegger was also studying mathematics, and that meant if he would study for 2-3 years, he could do a staatsexamen, so in mathematics, and that would qualify him as a teacher of mathematics at high school level or at a gymnasium in Germany. So that means that the problem would only be to get through 4 or 5 semesters, and then you would get a job pretty quickly. So then you would have no further financial problems. If you want to do a philosophical career, it's more complicated, because first you need to do your dissertation, and your only possibility basically it gives financial security is becoming a professor afterwards, and that means you have to do your habilitation. So that means also finding funding for 5-6 years of study, which Heidegger managed to do after all, when he did decide to go for philosophy. But it was also the fact that he got grants from Catholic foundations to do the kind of philosophical work he was doing, made it possible for him to also to move away from the church a couple of years later. And I think the theological career would also offer minor problems financially, because he could still become a priest, for example. But he didn't want to go that way. I think that he personally wanted to do philosophy, and basically Laszlowski then said as an alternative, why don't you study mathematics and sciences? And the other thing that played a role in his decision is that as a student of the newly created department of mathematics and physics. He was free in the choice of the lecture courses and seminars he took, and that was not the case if he would do philosophy. Then there were there was a curriculum that he would have to adhere to. So all three posed financial problems, but the first possibility was the easiest to solve, basically. And Heidegger did go hungry sometimes during his studies. He refers to it in several letters and talks about it with students. The way he studied is something he would not wish from anybody else. So it already shows you that it was a hard life. And but that hypothesis, sciences does not impose a conflict with the scholarship grant. Of course, it's if you would choose mathematics, you would not get a grant from Catholic Foundation. They would give money if he was doing something in the field of theology, or you could say a philosophical project with implications for theology and understanding of the history of Christianity, which a book like the one on Duns Scotus would qualify for. That's why he got money for it. And so with natural science and mathematics, it was more self-control. If you need to apply for a grant, you're always dependent on somebody else if they give you money or not. But if you can get by even on very limited resources, so you can get your license to teach mathematics, then there's a clear solution to the financial problems at the end of it. So if there's any other question or remark, feel free to type. Let's see. Where's the two? Hello. This is a question about als Einheimgespräch von der Sprache and the relationship between Heidegger and Japan. What do you think of this text? And this 1 and 2 is not, I think it's not visible yet. I think that the relation of Heidegger to Japan goes back to the 20s in Freiburg, when Japanese students were coming to Germany, since Germany was at that point in time the country with the best universities, and they came to study with Husserl in first instance, but then they also got to know Heidegger and his rather radical new way of thinking, so that Heidegger also gave private lectures to some Japanese students. The most famous is Count Kuki, who took lessons from Heidegger, and later in Paris he took lessons from Bergson. He's the guy that gave Heidegger the complete edition of Descartes as a gift. And So there's already a very early relation, and the first text of Heidegger to be translated in any language at all was in What is Metaphysics into Japanese. So there is a special connection between Japan and Heidegger. It also shows itself that Japan was the first country to do a complete translation of the Gesamtausgabe, and they've set it up in a pretty good way. The translators meet every year, and as long as Hartmut Buchner was alive, who also himself studied in Japan and was capable of speaking and reading Japanese, organized one event in Meschierch, and then the other year it would take place in Japan. And there the people who were translating Heidegger would get together and discuss problems of translation. And of course, I think there are 6 or 7 Japanese translations of Being and Time, so it shows you how intensely Heidegger was received in Japan. The text of this, it's not the actual conversation they had, it's a reworked version of it. And Heidegger is one of the things you can see that he's playing with it is that he is not precise in the titles of the lecture courses he gave in the 1920s, although he could have looked it up if he wanted to, but I think it's supposed to give a kind of let's say an immediacy to the conversation, that keeps it from becoming too, let's say, artistic or too worked over. I think it is an important text because it's also Heidegger's opening up towards non-Western philosophy or thinking, if you want to keep the word philosophy for what happened in Europe and basically with the beginning of Greek philosophy. I think Heidegger's relationships with all the Japanese, and there were a lot of Japanese coming to visit Heidegger, was always very friendly and polite, and also a bit formal. I think it's, of course, only met for limited periods of time. And language played an important role. I think what Heidegger got from these conversations with Japanese students, of course some of them were professors in their own right, is a better understanding of the whole problem of translation. That it's not just, let's say, exchanging a German word for Japanese word, but it's basically you have to transport the people who are reading the text into the world of the author. So that's of course pretty difficult, and is a reason I think that a lot of translations of Heidegger are very problematic. So that's about it on this subject. But for Heidegger, the difference is the interesting thing, to get some kind of feel for how different Japanese language is from Germany, or from German language, and how the being in the world of Japanese people is different from the being in the world of German people. And he liked haiku, for example. Irma van Botmershoofd, the fiancée of Van Hellengraat, who did the famous Hölderlin edition that Heidegger was always using, basically, and was killed in the First World War as a soldier. also wrote haikus, and she sends Heidegger some. And they have some interesting discussions about this kind of poetic writing, you could say. And he liked the No-Spiel as well, and the difference of acting on a Japanese stage compared to a production of Shakespeare. If there's still somebody who has a question or wants to ask something, feel free to do so. Let's see, I have to. If not, then I'll put the link for Zoom in the chat. And then I'll switch to Zoom in a minute. Then I can do my promised lecture. It's easier to do on Zoom for me. I don't know how to share photos here, I must admit. And of course, we can interact more freely afterwards because we can see each other. I can then also hear you. So, yeah, it's hard to write, listen, and think of questions spontaneously. That's true. But you can also you can also write them down later, or before, or after, whatever. You can also send them to me, and we can I'll reply by mail, or if it's possible, we can also say, well, we'll talk about it in doing a live stream. But I think it's all me. It's still new, this whole technology, and being a live streamer, YouTuber, stuff like that. I'm getting better at handling Zoom, so I have some hope that I will be getting better at live streaming. If there are no further questions, then I suggest that we move to Zoom. I think I've opened up Zoom already. No, I'll open it up now. There's still some questions coming, but we'll do them first then. As a biographer, how do you see Petzet biography? I think the biography of Petzet is basically kind of a remnants kind of book by a friend and student of Heidegger, who knew him from the 1920s until his death. I don't think it's a real biography. It's also too personal for it to be written with enough distance to have a clear view, I think. And there's, of course, interesting episodes that Petzet describes and mentions, but it's sometimes it's not true what he's saying. You can show that it's not the way it happened. But it's, of course, it's the way people remember Heidegger and talk about him is an important source. It's also something you have to be careful of. I've done quite a few interviews with people who knew Heidegger pretty well, like his sons, Gadamer, and others. And The problem is that your memory is not like a cupboard with drawers where you put things in, and you can pull them out, and there's still exactly the same way. Got distracted by the text. So you keep reinterpreting your memories. So people will tell you something of which they are convinced that it is true, that it happened that way 30 years ago. But in some cases, you can prove from an archive that what they say is not true. So there you have to be careful. And it's interesting, for example, that in a lot of Heidegger biographies, when Heidegger says something about, especially in 1933, 34, people will, like Ott, will check it against the material that is available in archives. But when they are using memories of Jaspers in his autobiography, they didn't do it. They take it as an objective truth on face value. And I think there is some room for improvement in writing a Heidegger biography. Other question is, which is the influence of Zen Buddhism philosophy on Heidegger's later thinking? I think I don't think there's much influence, to be honest. There are similarities, I think, that Heidegger was maybe surprised to see that some of the things he was developing in his own thinking were also being thought about in traditions outside of, let's say, the Abendland, or the Western culture. And it's also something that he got some understanding of through Method Boss, his psychiatrist, Dasein analyst friend, who went to India to study with the sages of India. And that's he also noticed some similarities and things between Heidegger thinking and the Indian traditions. But I think they developed independently, but you can see similarities, or find similarities, if you're schooled enough in Zen Buddhism, which I'm not, to be honest. So I would leave it at that. And let's see, there's one more question. Is it known which students attended Heidegger's lecture courses over the years? So, for instance, I think Keiji Nishitani studied with Heidegger in 1937, 1939. Is there a list of students in years? Yeah, there are lists of the people who attended Heidegger's lecture courses and seminars. You have inscriptions lists that are kept at the University of Freiburg. Most of them. There are some, of course, in Marburg. And there you can see who attended which lecture course. We can see when Löwit pops up, when Gadamer was with Heidegger, Tugendhat, you name them. I don't know all the names by heart, but it's an important source for that kind of thing. Often Heidegger would put a little red cross next to the name of the person who he thought would be somebody in philosophy, to put it that way. So with Hannah Arendt, Carl Löwit, you find these little red stars attached to their names. And Heidegger most of the time got it right. And sometimes there are students of Heidegger that people don't know, or very few people know that they ever attended Heidegger's lecture courses. I think with the Japanese, a lot of it was not unusual also to give them private hours, basically, where they could visit Heidegger and talk to him and ask their questions directly, and not in the setting of a seminar or lecture course. Do you pretend to present your present Heidegger biographical webinar through the period that goes beyond 1928-29? No, it's basically going to stop with the end of the Marburg period. And then the second part will start in Freiburg in 28 when Heidegger was the successor of Husserl, and he started giving his first lecture course as a full professor in Freiburg. And then, of course, you get pretty quickly into the whole problematic of the National Socialism issue, to put it that way. But I'll intend to do a second one after the summer, probably, and then go through that period. And that will run till 1945, which is the end of Heidegger as basically a university teacher in the end of the Second World War. And then the final third part will be starting when Heidegger gets back to Freiburg, and how his life develops then through the denazification process, his contacts with foreigners like Boss and Beaufray, and how they interacted with Heidegger, the problems he had with the university, and the university with Heidegger, you could say. And he did return to the university as a teacher in 1951, but he never became a full professor again. And that you can also see in the shift in the text he's writing. So if you wanna deal with that period, you will have to wait for the second webinar. And it's of course the first attempt to try some things out and put a lot of stuff in some form that may work. I think I'm going to stop with the live stream and then go back to Zoom if you want to join me there. I'll put in the link one more time so you can copy it. If you did, then I'll say bye for now. I'll do it again next month. I will try to make no mistakes on the technical front. So if you like, you can move to Zoom and then we can do the lecture. So see you hopefully in a minute, and if I don't see you in a minute, then hopefully we'll see each other next week again or some other time. So enjoy your Sunday and take care. Bye-bye. Okay.